So I'm Kirsten Cook. I'm with the Okanagan Conservation District. We serve the entire county of Okanagan. We're based in the city of Okanagan, but it's always nice to come over here to the Met Howe. I do a lot of work here as well. So I'm also a forest landowner. This is a picture of my house, so I wanted to just let you know that I can relate. I have 85 acres of trees, rocks, and rattlesnakes, and lately we've had moose, so that's a fun and exciting thing. So the Conservation District, raise your hand if you've worked with your Conservation District in your county. Okay, that's better than most rooms, so that's good. I like that. So conservation districts come from the Dust Bowl days. So we were created basically to be the local voice in conservation, to balance in the Dust Bowl. There were a lot of East Coast, and I can say this because I'm from the East Coast originally, scientists who came over and maybe were a little bit snooty about things. And so the local voice was needed to kind of ground those folks in the reality of the place that they were coming to provide assistance. And so that's the basis of conservation districts. We work collaboratively with landowners. It's their choice on what they want to do. Our job is to provide them with options. And so since 2012, I've been working on the Firewise program. And recently, Firewise has decided to get a little bit strict about their brand. And so I'm just going to call it Wildfire Preparedness from here on out. So my goal today is to hopefully everyone will walk away with something that they didn't know about how to prepare their home and their neighborhood from wildfire. So as all of you have heard, and I think folks in this room probably understand better than most, fire is a natural part of our environment. And we have chosen to live in a place where fire is a natural part of our environment. And so what we need to do as folks who live there is to become adapted to that, to understand what our risk is and make some choices that can reduce our risk. We'll never take our risk away completely, but you can absolutely do things that will reduce your risk. And we're zooming out away from the forest right now and sort of around our homes, right? That's what I want you to be thinking about, is your home, your neighbor's home, your family's home. And I want to say here, too, that being a fire-adapted community is not just one person's job. It's all of ours. And I am lucky to work with a fabulous slate of partners. The Department of Natural Resources, Landowner Assistance folks in particular, we work really well together. We have a great partnership that works well. But also NRCS and local fire districts and our local emergency managers and our local landowners. So we all have to work together to deal with this issue. And you know, this issue, whether you think it's a wildfire issue or not, what it is a home ignition issue. We have a problem with losing homes. And so this is the alternate title of my talk today. It doesn't take a megafire to burn your house down. These are two homes in this valley, pretty typical homes for this valley. Both are at higher risk than they need to be being lost to a wildfire, even if it's a small one. Since I lived for 18 years on the west side of the state, I know that sometimes wildfire is not at the top of mind for those who live there. So I just wanted to bring up this map of all of the fires on federal property since 1981. You can see that there's a number of triangles on the other side of the Cascades from here. And anyone who lived in Mason County probably knows in 2015, 8 homes were lost. So Carlton Complex, we lost over 300 homes. It was a 250,000 acre fire. This was 150 acres, and it lost 8 homes. Okay, so it doesn't take necessarily a megafire, as I said, to burn your house down. But there is a lot of things that you can do to solve this problem. So a lot of times, hey, I live in the woods. Okay, so I should realize, yes, there's probably fire going to happen. I expect that on my property. It's sooner or later, it's going to burn. But the thing is that a lot of times we focus on, okay, it's just those houses out in the WUI, the wildland-urban interface. Those are the ones that we're going to worry about, right? Well, sadly, we learned in Pateros, no, it's not just the homes in the WUI. And I hear still to this day, people, when I talk to them about a Firewise assessment, they say, oh, I live in town. Oh, I don't need to worry about that. Oh, I mowed. And it's like, you know, the folks who lost their homes in Pateros, their homes were not surrounded by wildland vegetation. They had lawns, they had trees, but they had something about their property that made it vulnerable to either embers or some other ignition source. And so as much as possible, please help me spread the word. Even if you live in town, if you live near a forested area or a shrub steppe area, you are at risk because embers can travel. So what does the science tell us? Luckily, for the last, I would say, 15, 20 years, there has been a lot of effort, in particular by the Forest Service and the Missoula Fire Science Center to put a lot of work into research. So it's not only happening in the field where they go out after a fire and try to figure out how did a home burn, but they're actually doing stuff in the laboratory now. And I encourage you all to go to the Institute for Business and Home Safety, go to their website, and watch these videos, because I gotta say, it seems like a cool job. They basically build houses in a lab and then try to destroy them. It's like being 5 with Legos again, right? So they throw fire at them, they throw water at them, they throw hail at them. It's incredible, but they've done some amazing work in finding out why are homes igniting. And I didn't have the time to do the video, but there is an amazing video that basically shows all the different ways homes can ignite simply from embers. And the main thing the research is pointing out is that just like the fire triangle needs fuel, which we usually think about as our wildland vegetation, right? Our trees, our shrubs. Unfortunately, homes are fuel. And I forgot to mention at the beginning, but I do just want to say, I know some folks in this room have experienced fire, have experienced loss as a part of fire, and so there are going to be some images in here that you may find difficult, and I'm sorry, but they are the most instructive. So please forgive me for that if you find these difficult. Homes are fuel. And not only are we building homes that are fuel in places where they can burn, but then we're planting more fuel around them. And in some cases, we're planting extremely flammable fuel around them, like junipers. And then maybe we're making some fabulous decor for our front entry made of fuel. If you can tell, those are pine needle or pine cones and lichen. They were about this wide, so next to the door frame. And then just to put a nice cherry on the sundae, sometimes we're actually stacking fuel on our homes, which are fuel. So as a society, we've kind of disconnected where we live in the environment sometimes, right? So we are not thinking about what might happen. And as I tell people when I go out and do home risk assessments, my job is to imagine the worst case scenario, right? Is to imagine what could happen if fire came to this place that you have right now. The most important thing to understand, first of all, if you're going to solve this problem, is how does this problem happen, right? And so how do homes ignite? There's 3 ways. Radiant heat, like you're standing around the campfire, and that's where that magic 30-foot number is. So if you've ever experienced any Firewise experience, you hear 30 feet, 30 feet. Well, 30 feet is the distance at which a wood wall will ignite just from radiant heat, which means that if you have heat sources closer to your wood wall than 30 feet, you have increased your risk dramatically. The second way is probably the most obvious one, right? Direct flame contact. So if fire can move from the woods or from the shrub step to your home, this is a distinct risk factor. And most people stop there. They're like, okay, so I've mowed so the fire can't get near me, and I've cleared everything out so the radiant heat can't get me. But then we forget about embers. And the studies are showing that embers are the main reason that homes ignite in wildfire events. Okay? More than half of homes are lost due to embers. And if you've never experienced an ember storm, and I think this was in the era of megafires, this is from the fire in Wenatchee a few years ago, this is what it looks like. So just imagine thousands and thousands and thousands of these pelting your home and pelting your landscape right around your home. What's going to happen? And this is, I think, probably one of the best pictures. So this is from the research they did on a fire in California. And if you look closely around that home, what color is all of the landscaping? It's green. Okay, so this fire did not ignite from heat. It did not ignite from fire moving through the landscaping to that home. Something landed on that, some burning thing landed on something on that home and ignited that home. Okay, so that's why I'm constantly talking embers, embers, embers. You must think about what could fly through the air and land on your home. And that's why, with all this research now coming together, when you look at the Firewise program and any of the information you get, they're going to talk about the home ignition zone, okay? That's 0 to 30 feet, the home and 30 feet out. And that's where we've got to put our efforts, folks. Everyone is always like, oh, I cut my trees, oh, I did my shrubs. You've got to start at the home. So this is what that looks like, right? So that zone 1, that structure ignition zone. What is there? So let's talk about some of those things we need to focus on. So the house. Raise your hand if you have a wood shake roof. Okay. The first thing I would recommend you do if you live in wildfire country is to replace your roof. because that is your biggest surface area, right? That is where most of the embers are going to land. Now the good news is most people have a composite roof, right? The 3-tab roofing. That stuff's great as long as it's in good shape, okay? Everyone's like, oh, I have to get a metal roof, I have to get a metal roof. No, you can have a composite roof. It just has to be in good shape. And you have to keep it clean, right? The windows, you want to have at least double pane, because if you have too much heat coming in, you can crack one of those panes. It's nice to have a backup pane, right? The siding. This is a really tough one, because a lot of the home associations that we have here in the Met-How in particular have required homeowners to have wood siding because it looks natural, right? It blends in. But that increases your risk. And so if you have wood siding, then you have to take a really careful look at all of your landscaping around you, because that's going to put you more at risk from any of the radiant heat or the direct flame contact or the embers. There are a lot of great options out there. The prices are not that different from some of the wood options, the fiber cement siding, the stucco, rock, that kind of thing. Or at least, have a little bit of metal skirting around the edge. That can help a lot. That's a big one. So the other one I want to remind people is that if it's attached to the house, it's part of the house. So this picture comes from a study of a fire in California, and they found that something like 40% of the ignitions in that fire came from people's fences. So the fire started out further away from the home, followed the fence like a wick, and the fence was attached to the house, and that's what started the house on fire. So if you happen to have a wood fence that's attached to your house, take out a section of wood and replace it with metal. Replace it with something that's not going to ignite. Let's talk about vents. So if you were out in the lobby and you saw my table, you saw a couple of different engineered vents. And this has really been coming out of the most recent research. They're showing that embers intruding into houses through vents is contributing to one of the biggest reasons why homes ignite from embers. And if you think about it, it makes sense, right? So the vents are there in our house to pull air through our structure so that we don't get mold, we don't have problems like that. So imagine if the air is full of embers and the air is being pulled through your vent, especially if it's a gable end vent facing the wind, right? So that's going to force a lot of embers into your structure. And if you're like me and you have a crawl space that's sort of like an attic and it's full of cardboard, yeah. There's choices though. Most folks, they're not going to replace all of their vents with an engineered vent, but you can put 1/8 inch metal screen over it. It's not too hard to do. But if you do want to, there are a lot of options. California, if you didn't know, has incredibly strong building codes for the wildland-urban interface. And because they have incredibly strong building codes, they have manufacturers who have innovated these things. They have engineered vents to resist embers, and it's really fascinating. And you can retrofit your house, but that is a really important thing to look at. Look at those vents around your house. Are they bigger than 1/8 inch? Decks are another one. So typically it's not the deck itself that's a problem, it's something that's under the deck or on top of the deck. A lot of times we see decks built over steep slopes and there's nothing underneath them but native vegetation that's going to burn. A lot of times people like to store their firewood or their extra lumber underneath. Okay, so that is a problem because you're basically adding fuel to this. And then the other piece is, what's around the deck. On the bottom left, you can see that there's a lot of debris left around this deck that is likely to catch an ember because it's a really light fuel and then spread to the deck itself. And then looking at, what's leading up to the deck in terms of the fencing and the landscaping. So there's a lot of good information out there. And some of you are going to go on the field trip to Ken Bevis's house tomorrow, and this is his deck. So he has a deck made of a composite material. I don't know if it was Trex or what, but he sent me these pictures after Rising Eagle because I had done his risk assessment like a month before. And he's like, look, it has burn holes, but it didn't burn, right? So there are a lot of options for having more resilient building materials, whether it's your decking, your siding, your roofing. So if you're at the point where you need to replace a deck, this is a good choice to look at. And you can go to the California Fire Marshal's website and find an entire searchable database on building materials that will tell you what to use. And so I want to compare a couple houses here. These are all from the Met-How. And the first one that's outlined in red is a gorgeous house, right? They have wonderful landscaping. It's quite lovely. It's also quite risky. And let me point out a few different things. First of all, it's a cedar-sided house. That's a risk factor in and of itself. But if you look at the landscaping around it, all of those plants are surrounded by bark chip. right? Wood chip mulch, and then they have drip irrigation, so the only thing getting watered is the base of the plant. And so all of these plants are growing up under these eaves. And you can imagine if that ember storm starts hitting this landscaping, what's going to happen. And the rule of thumb is 3 times the height of the fuel. And you can see these guys have a 2-3 foot ornamental grass right by their front door. And so if that were to ignite, that's easily going to get up into the roofing structure and likely ignite this home. So what we recommend for folks living in fire country is that you have a non-flammable perimeter around your house. And in fact, we've started cost sharing on that at the Conservation District. So we will offer cost share to folks to basically create, as you see in the lower right, create that fire break around their home so that there's nothing growing under the eaves that is potential to ignite their structure. And they're showing, again, the research, and this is all based on the research, that even just 1 foot of non-flammable space right under your eaves makes a big difference in whether your home ignites. So let's talk a little bit about landscaping. I don't know if anyone else is like me in the room who likes to buy plants because they're really cool and then they die because they're not good at taking care of them. Hopefully you're better at taking care of them than I am. This is a fabulous example of Firewise landscaping, right? Because what they've done is they've got their plants, they've chosen plants that are fire resistant. Every plant will burn if you get it hot and dry enough, but you can choose fire-resistant plants, and this is a fabulous book that you can download from OSU that talks about all the different fire-resistant plants. What I would like everyone to avoid is anything that the firefighters call little green gas cans or gasoline on a stick, and that would be arborvitae and juniper and really any conifer, anything that has those, volatile oils that smell good. Because has anybody ever walked up to an arborvitae and gone like this? What's inside? Dead stuff, right? And so you can imagine, again, that ember storm just pelting that sucker. And, a lot of people, it's a pretty easy plant to get, it's a pretty easy plant to maintain, and it makes a great screen from your neighbors. But please, 30 feet away from the house at least. And you do need to watch out for mulch. So whether it's bark mulch or wood chips or pine needles or any of that stuff, that is always going to be an ignition concern for embers, right? And especially if your bark goes right up next to your siding. So again, that's why we say non-flammable perimeter. That is your best option. Ideally, you want to take your landscaping from something like this, where you've got just everything touching the house, to much clearer around your house. And this is going to help with the firefighters, right? If there is a fire in the area and they roll up on your place, they're going to be like, oh, I feel better about this place because it's safer. Here's a great example of a home that did all the right things and it survived tunk block. You can see that it's got a metal roof, it's got fiber cement siding, they have a non-flammable perimeter. And the thing about this house, because when these fires hit, our resources were stretched thin, right? There were no firefighters who could be there. This is the question I ask folks. Could your house stand alone? Because if there's a large fire that overwhelms our resources, it is going to be alone. And so the best thing you can do is make it to harden that structure and make it survive. All right, so everybody wants to talk about away from the house and into the zone 2 and zone 3 and talking about sort of those areas. Defensible space. You've heard that term, I'm guessing. Defensible space is basically where you've modified the vegetation to do 2 things. You want to change the fire behavior, because you're not going to stop the fire, but you can hopefully get it down on the ground where it's doing sort of minimal damage. And you want to create a safe space for firefighters in case they are there to operate. And your defensible space depends on your land, right? If you've got flat ground and grass, 30 feet is likely all you will need. If you have a larger property, however, and you've got bitter brush, for example, on a steep slope, you need much more defensible space. And anybody who knows fire behavior knows why, because fire moves faster uphill, it preheats the fuels in front of it, and so you need to create more space around it. And I do want to point out, since I live in the woods partly because I wanted to see more wildlife, that you can balance wildlife and Firewise, and Ken will be the first one to tell you because he and I taught a class on it together. You can balance the 2. The trick is to create the gaps in the fuels so that you don't have one continuous path of fuel all the way through. So if you look at this drawing here, which I like a lot, you'll see as you get that 30 to 75 feet away, you have much bigger spaces between your plants. And as you get even further away, those spaces get a little bit smaller, but they're still there, right? You don't ever have a continuous path of whatever your fuel is leading up to your zone. So again, here's a great example of defensible space for a home that survived the Carlton complex. You can see that they did their work ahead of time, that their trees are limbed, that they don't have a lot right there. Their firewood is 30 feet away, their propane tank is 30 feet away. So, when you go back home, take a look at some of your risk factors. I want you to look, what's your risk from surface fire? What do you have for needles and debris? And what do you have for ladder fuels, right? What do you have for fuels that can take the fire from the ground into your trees? Because once it gets into the trees, there's not a whole lot firefighters can do. It's too dangerous, it's too hot. Take a look at your risk from radiant heat. Do you have heat sources closer than 30 feet to your home? Here's a good example. This is a vinyl-sided house, and so if those arborvitae catch fire, that vinyl is going to sag and expose what's behind it, which is probably either plywood or OSB, right? And those are both flammable. And so this house is at risk because it has a huge source of radiant heat right next to it. And finally, evaluate your risk from embers. And it's the little stuff, I hate to say it, but needles and leaves in your window wells, the broom left on the porch. And if you have the fabulous outdoor living room, which is awesome, be ready to take it in when there's a red flag warning or there's a fire in the area, because everything on that porch is potential ignition zone for embers, right? So think about the little stuff. And finally, my final plea, I'm like everybody else, I want my firewood fuzzy slipper distance. I do not want to put my boots on. That is absolutely fine in winter. But please, during fire season, please put your firewood 30 feet away from your home. Not only does it put up a ton of heat, but if you have firefighters trying to respond, they are going to use all of their water just on that firewood pile. It takes massive amounts of water. And if you're familiar with brush trucks like we have a lot out here, they carry 200-300 gallons, and that's gone at full blast in about 8 minutes. Okay, so think about, not only are you protecting your home, but you're doing a lot to help our firefighters and our resources. You don't have to do it alone. There are fabulous resources out there online. There's a ton of information. The National Fire Protection Association has just put out all of these fact sheets that really get into the nitty-gritty of decks and vents and all of that stuff. Incredibly helpful. The IBHS, also incredibly helpful. But honestly, people tell me, yeah, I went online and it kind of went in one ear and out the other. The best thing you can do is get one of us to come do a home assessment for you. Get somebody else's eyes on your property for you. Even folks who know this stuff really well, I come out or one of our staff comes out and they're like, oh, I didn't think of that, right? It's always helpful to have other eyes. So contact your conservation district, talk to your DNR folks, talk to your local fire district. I can't tell you, in your county who does your home risk assessments, but start with your conservation district and I bet that they know. And finally, a word for the Firewise program. So obviously, if we do this ourselves, our home is protected, but really this works better when we work together. And so the Firewise USA program is about neighborhoods working together to get official recognition that they are doing the right thing. And in some cases, in some states, they're getting insurance discounts because they're in a Firewise community, and that's a pretty big motivator. If there's anybody who's got USAA insurance in this room, call them and ask them why they haven't rolled it out to Washington yet, because when I was at a meeting in 2015, they said they were going to get it to us here, and I haven't seen it yet, but I don't have USAA. So anyway, my solution for my thing I always say about Firewise communities, it takes 3 things. It takes patience, it takes persistence, and it takes potlucks. And sometimes it takes a lot of potlucks because it's that patience and persistence thing, right? So this picture is our very first Firewise community in Okanagan County. We have 6 now and 2 are pending. The very first one in the Chillowas, the first potluck, 5 people showed up. Second potluck, 10 people showed up. By the time they got recognition 2 years later of building this, support, we had 50 people and the county's emergency manager who had all been like, yeah, Firewise, whatever. He talked for 20 minutes about how awesome it was. So, it's just basically a good reason to get your neighbors together and say, hey, we can do something about this. We can't make it go away completely, but boy, we can make a difference. So I do encourage you to learn about the Firewise USA program, talk to your neighbors, and try to get them engaged. So this is the final thing I want to leave you with. Homes with low ignitability can survive high-intensity wildfires. They can survive mega fires. But if you have a highly ignitable home, it can be destroyed in a low-intensity fire. Questions?